thanks a lot for coming out, you guys. I really appreciate you giving me your Friday morning before a big weekend. So I'm going to talk about positive change, about design for good, and hopefully be able to answer some basic questions that you guys might have. I guess first I want to give a quick shout out to a lot of my former students who have come this morning. I appreciate you guys showing up. This might be a good refresher course for you guys. There's a basic kind of fundamental set of knowledge that I want to cover today about what it is, how it functions, how it's different than normal graphic design, or whatever that might be. And then showcase some professional projects, some student projects, and then talk a little bit about how you can pursue interest in this area of design. So, as long as there have been dominant paradigms, dominant powers in the world, there have been undercurrents of things opposing those powers. And those are, the most memorable forms of those are usually articulated either visually, like this, a very memorable image, or are documented visually in images like this. In both these examples, the creation of visuals to support an idea and the documentation of activities such as this are both a testament to the power of visual communication. And through history, we can view example after example of how design has functioned in this way. People using design skills to expose corruption, using their skills to fight for equal rights, using their skills to speak against tyranny, to advocate for the disenfranchised, and to create whole movements around a particular set of ideas. And there are, of course, millions more images that I'm sure you guys have all seen throughout history that could be told again and again about people how they've historically used visual communication and graphic design to incite advancements in the social sphere. But we only have an hour total, so I'm not going to try to cover the whole history of how this movement has evolved. So while today's incarnation of design for good certainly includes attributes of all those things that I just showed, over the past decade or decade and a half, there's become a more thoughtful, more critical, and more fleshed out approach to this type of design. What function it serves, how it operates and how it can operate, how it interacts with people out on the street, everyday citizens. And those kind of methodologies are setting this aspect of design apart from traditional uses of graphic design, even as it struggles to find its own identity. People are calling this thing all different kind of names. I mean, obviously they share similarities, but people are still struggling for a language, and we can see that echoed even in the past as practitioners move from the term commercial art to graphic design to visual communication. The field evolves over time, and that's very much what we're seeing here. And it's interesting to see and be a part of a field that's kind of emerging as its own new subset and trying to become its own thing and figure out who it is and what it is, as well as how it operates. So, how is this thing different from traditional graphic design? Like, what is it that sets it apart? I feel like this is one of the most important aspects of this area of work, and that's the conceptual framework. Excuse me. The values, the motivations that underpin and shape the work that comes out of this field. So let's start with this as a way to kind of set things apart. The Young Foundation's 2006 definition of social innovation, very simple: new ideas that work to meet pressing unmet needs. So here's their claim: that there are people who have needs. Okay, that seems pretty obvious. that society is no longer succeeding in meeting significant aspects of those needs, either through governments or through markets. And so designers can and should help those people to meet their needs in other ways. So in other ways, the non-market oriented, non-government oriented, and independent aspects of this statement are what I feel are important in terms of positioning this area of design. And of course the edges are going to be gray, they're going to be fuzzy. And they should be fuzzy, and just like all the subdisciplines of communication design are fuzzy in the way that they kind of meld and flow into each other. So it's hard to say, okay, this is absolutely non-market oriented, non-government oriented, etc. But generally we're going to be talking about this space that isn't served by either of those entities. So in short, the primary differences as I see them can be broken down into these three categories. Who you work for, the project's ends, what the goals are, and the purpose of the project, and then the process that you engage in. So those are three primary differences as I see them. So we'll talk about who you work for, and it was alluded to in that earlier definition, the non-government, non-market kind of servicing of people's fundamental needs. So it's a different kind of clientele. Designers working with communities versus designers working with clients, also known as marketing. And that could be things like community development organizations, citizens groups, like ad hoc groups that don't necessarily have a formal organization or don't have some sort of charter or like a 501c3 status or something like that. Could be other nonprofit organizations that do have that status, from micro to macro. So people that are working at the neighborhood level, a group of 5 or 10 people, or as when I was at KCAI, Kansas City Art Institute, working with my students, we would oftentimes work with the Rosedale Development Association, and I think they have all of like 4 full-time employees there. So that would be an example of the micro nonprofit, and then macro where you have like the World Wildlife Fund, or people, organizations that are working globally, or Amnesty International, things like that. And then, it could be government organizations at state, local, federal level. Or it could be, and that's part of the area where we're bleeding into this other kind of zone. And then at the other end, socially minded business ventures, also known as social enterprise. Think of things like Tom's Shoes, or get one, give one, that kind of idea, more social enterprise ventures. So it's somehow kind of linked with, what's the term people are using now, like conscious capitalism and things like that. So, I won't go there. Okay, so the other thing, the second aspect that's different is the project's ends. That it satisfies needs rather than wants. And I'm not saying that I'm against satisfying wants or that there's no place for that, but I'm not here to talk about that. So this is from a quote from Victor Papanek, who was an industrial designer who was working in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s a bit. He actually coincidentally taught at KU for quite a long time and did a brief stint at KCAI as well. His book, Design for the Real World, is really awesome. So he says in there, the lesson of this book is to design for people's needs rather than their wants, and he dedicated his life to that idea. So the process is also a different type of process as I see it. There's obviously going to be a lot of similarities, things that you'll recognize from your own practice. But the first item here, responsibility and sustainability, that kind of value set versus a disposable culture value set. So again, from Papanek's book, and this was in the late 70s that he said this. The economy of the marketplace, however, is still geared to a static philosophy of purchasing, owning, rather than a dynamic one of leasing, using. So in the 70s, he's already thinking about the cyclical kind of cradle to cradle not cradle to grave, but cradle to cradle philosophy of how we deal with the stuff that we make, rather than this linear cradle to grave, like, okay, we're just gonna make this stuff, we'll put it out there, and it's the consumer's responsibility to dispose of it properly or whatever. So he's already thinking about how can we replace these purchasing and owning kind of paradigms with something where you lease a product and then you give it back, or you return it and someone else can use it, that sort of thing. And then in an interview with Dr. Michael Braungart, Alan Chochinov, who's another industrial designer, they were talking about this idea that we're no longer in the artifact business, but in the consequences business. So we need to think not just about the stuff that we make, but what are the consequences of the stuff we make on all different kind of levels. So to further that idea, we need to move beyond focusing on that stuff, consider how it affects people, and consider how it affects the systems into which we inject the stuff that we make. So it's not just this thing that we make, but there's a system around it, a system that it affects and is affected by it. And that's even to kind of assume that we should be making stuff. Because we could be designing services, we could be designing human-to-human interactions, we could be designing processes. So a little bit more about the process, so this non-traditional value set. So we have this idea of responsibility, sustainability, which I just touched on. The idea that things are user-driven, that's kind of a no-brainer in the whole world of design. Everything's moving to that, and should be moving to that very heavily if it hasn't already. The idea of utilizing localized processes whenever possible, and that things are modifiable and open sourced. So the idea of the continuous beta kind of creeps in here, where a project is never exactly done, but it's always open to improvements and changes and revisions. And that it's open source, being that it's not like my property and you can't use it. The idea of intellectual property kind of starts to work against the idea of serving people's needs in the best possible way, because if you exert kind of a closed source or ownership model over this thing where no one else can touch it or improve on it, then that's not really serving people, the everyday citizens' best interests. So just to kind of give a point of comparison here, you have these things on the left that I just talked about versus sort of the normal, this is the path we're headed down, disposable culture where we're not thinking about sustainability or that cradle to cradle cyclical mentality. Corporate-driven agenda, like, what is the need of your client rather than like moving beyond the corporate client need and focusing on the user and what their needs are. Globalized processes where we'll just move all over the world and do whatever, access whatever resources we need to access to be able to get this stuff done, as opposed to trying to take advantage of localized processes and people and manufacturing and all that as much as possible. And then that proprietary ownership kind of mindset where it's like, these ideas are mine, no one else can take them, no one else can use them. And these are all, I guess I should say, well, now I got to back up here. All these things are because the priority number one is to serve people's needs. Okay, so we've kind of established what's different, how it's different, and so we'll take a look at some good projects and their qualities. Like what are the things that make up a good piece of design for good, design for social innovation, design for change. So good projects are these things. Good projects are functional in serving fundamental needs and rights. We've already established that fairly clearly. Good projects understand the context and the systems in which they're embedded. So again, we're not just looking at the thing that we're making, but we're looking at the system that you're going to be putting that thing into. We're looking at the context, the physical surroundings, the emotional and mental surroundings, all the human-centered kind of surroundings into which you're putting this stuff. Good projects understand the community's needs, they understand the community's obstacles, and their motivations. The only way you can do that is by getting out and talking to those people. And by far the best projects that I've seen that have come out of my classes where we've done these kind of things have been the projects where the students have gone out and had the most contact with people and they understand this stuff the best. So we try as much as we can, and you'll see this later on when I show some student work. We try as much as we can to push students out into the community and get them interacting with the actual people who will use this stuff. It's incredibly important. I think a lot of times kids come into school and they think, oh, I'm going to work in my studio and then I'll be there for hours toiling away and then I'm going to come out and ta-da, here's this thing, that I made, and then they don't realize like, oh, I never really talked to anyone that's actually going to use this thing. We didn't user test it, we didn't prototype it, all that good stuff. So the best projects understand those things in a real kind of personal way, not in a theoretical way, or not from like reading a bunch of market research or whatever. The best projects seek long-term engagement with the community. There's been a problem with some of the stuff as this part of design has started to grow with people sort of, and you'll see this, it's funny because I see a parallel between this type of design work and missionary work. So, which seems strange, but let me explain. So you can, with a design, with your skill set, you have the ability to sort of parachute in and you can like do this thing really fast and say, okay, I solved your problem. See you later, I gotta get back to my job. And then you like leave this neighborhood or this community or this country, and then they're left to kind of do whatever they do with that thing. And a lot of times those things just like sort of get left there. So the best projects are seeking long-term engagement. So you're becoming a committed partner, it's a relationship. It's just like any of your bosses at your studios, like they don't want one-off projects. They want things that are long-term relationships because you want to cultivate that, you get to know the client better. It's the same kind of situation here. So the best projects are going to have long-term engagement where you keep coming back, you keep refining, you keep satisfying more needs or different needs or whatever, and you understand that relationship better and the people that you're dealing with that much better through that long-term commitment. The best projects utilize participatory processes whenever possible. And I've included several examples of that as well. So the more you can involve people in the process of either co-creation, co-designing in some way, or at least having some kind of input into that system. Even if it's after the thing's done, if the thing that you made or this process that you made is participatory somehow, where they have ownership into the thing. And it also empowers them because they've been able to contribute to the thing in some way. And the best projects use the community's voice as much as is practical. They also clearly reflect the values of the community or the author. So you should be able to tell from really good projects, like what are the values behind this? It's not some kind of sneaky like bait and switch thing. It's like, this is what we believe in and this is the issue we're addressing. Here it is. All right, so what does this stuff look like? We'll start with some professional work and then we'll go into some student work. So this is from AIGA.org. There's some really nice case studies on there of some really excellent design projects that are in kind of the social sphere. So this is an exhibition called Neighborhoods and Shared Memories, and I don't know if it was or still is at the El Paso Museum of History. It's a community-sourced exhibit that empowers its members to tell their story through the artifacts that they've contributed. So it's the story of their neighborhoods in their own words, essentially. So here on this particular slide, you see this kind of title typography of this one particular neighborhood in El Paso. That is derived from some sort of Latino political graffiti. And then a lot of the imagery, actually almost all the imagery on here is sourced directly from community members. So that's that participatory element. Researchers from the design team were working alongside the museum's researchers to give shape to this collection through the grouping of stories and artifacts from themes that emerged as they sifted through this stuff. So they were looking through all this information and saying, oh, here's these kind of ideas that are emerging from the stuff that we've received. And so this is kind of dark, but this is a little theater inside the exhibit that's showcasing some video oral histories directly from people in the community. So it's everyday citizen storytelling kind of format. So this way of organizing the content is I don't know how many of you guys work in exhibition design, but it's a pretty significant break from the more traditional museum exhibition process where there's a curatorial team, they're the ones that are the experts, and they establish the exhibition storylines, and they're the ones that have the ultimate say-so, rather than responding to all this citizen input and letting the material responding to the material and letting the material shape the direction that the exhibition goes in. So they don't have any preconceived notions of, oh, we want to tell this story. It's like, okay, what's all this stuff from the citizens telling us that the story is, right? So with this exhibit, the community is the curator. And there's some other kind of participatory elements after the fact. So there was the participatory aspect of people providing content to make the thing. So they're actually, providing content, but then after the fact, there's these other participatory elements like this sort of play space where kids can use these blocks to sort of redefine or reimagine what El Paso might look like. And there's also these kind of activity sheets that they can use. And there's some other participatory elements in this exhibit where you can kind of input information onto walls and things like that. Okay, so this project was initiated by a nonprofit organization called Life in Abundance, and they were seeking help from the design studio Rule 29, and they also partnered with Kent State University students. So it's kind of a mishmash of 3 different groups collaborating together on this project. So the goal is to provide visual communication tools for people in Kibera. Kibera is in Nairobi, Kenya, and it's the 2nd largest slum in the world. So Kibera is like sort of a neighborhood, a big slum neighborhood in Nairobi. And the goal of these materials is to help educate and reinforce positive public health habits with regard to malaria, obviously. So in this poster you see a high level of iconography, low level of text-based information because of issues of literacy, outlining symptoms and what you need to do when you experience these symptoms. You need to seek treatment. Now this might seem really obvious to us, but we don't know what their culture is like, right? We didn't do the research on this. So this is the result of people going out into the community and talking to people and understanding their needs and the culture that surrounds this problem. Obviously there's a problem with malaria because people weren't seeking treatment and they were having issues with it. So they needed to have some way to address it. So one thing that they found out was that out of convenience, most Kiberans will seek traditional healers for health assistance and health information. And they also have a distrust for large international aid organizations, which, that kind of makes sense. So these materials were intended to guide people toward more directly toward clinics where people have, clearly medical experience and medical training, and they can provide better quality of care. So moving them towards qualified people rather than traditional healers who are maybe going to give more sort of anecdotal or more DIY kind of, for lack of a better phrase, solutions. So a little booklet here that gives a little bit more detail about treatment and symptoms. And then this solution, again, it simplifies information as much as possible. Directs viewers to make these really small but important changes and how to prevent and how to take proper doses of medicine. So up here you see like some really kind of simple and multilingual explanations of how to prevent. And then you see a very simplified visualization of what the correct dosage is based on your weight and age. So the yellow is daytime dosage, and then the dark blue with the little moon is nighttime dosage. So it just shows you very directly how many pills you need to be taking in the day, how many pills you need to be taking at night. And then there's also this active engagement component where children are further educated through board game and activity book. And these things are designed to reinforce the health information they're getting during the school day. So these are kind of after school activities that reinforce the school information in a more sort of active and participatory way. All right, the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan is the group that initiated this project, Urban Forest Project. So they wanted to do three things with this project. They wanted to crowdsource data about their city's forest. Two, they wanted to build awareness of the benefits of a healthy tree canopy. You know, why are trees good? And three, get citizens more engaged with their trees, and therefore gain more appreciation for the trees that are there. So Plenty is the studio in Grand Rapids that developed this campaign. So they created this website that makes it really easy for the public to participate in gathering data about the trees. And that includes this map. So they created this user interface design. It's an online tree map where people can search for, they can identify, and they can help map local trees. And then to help in this process, they have this tree key, which you see at the bottom here, the little button. So they developed this little illustration to help people more easily identify the trees that are maybe on their block or in their neighborhood. And then they also developed a sort of an awareness campaign to kind of let people know through these promotional materials and signage and things like that to raise awareness about the project itself, including, and maybe you guys saw some of these things. I saw a couple of years ago these little tags on trees that talked about how much money trees kind of gave back or what value they had. They were in Kansas City. I think I saw some on like Ward Parkway where it kind of flows into the plaza. So similar idea here, just communicating the value of trees. This project actually won a grant, a $19,000 grant from Sappy Paper. They have a program that they've been doing for at least 10 years now called Ideas That Matter, and it's expressly to give money to projects like this that are in the design and social change sphere to help fund this type of work. So they got $19,000 to initiate this project. Okay, so don't get iced. Getting arrested can have serious consequences for non-citizens that are living in the United States. Even if a minor crime, even if they're involved in some minor crime, or even a dismissed case might lead to their deportation. So even if they're innocent and haven't done anything wrong, they may come in enough contact with the law where questions start to get asked and they may be deported and taken away from their families. So this is an interactive piece designed by the Center for Urban Pedagogy. And so it helps non-citizens, it helps their families, and it helps their lawyers to navigate the legal system and to avoid deportation if they do get arrested. This is an example of user testing in the middle of the process. So this piece is constructed as a choose your own adventure. And Don't Get Iced shows what can happen if you go down this path. You know, you choose these particular things through the story, and shows what happens to non-citizens who've been arrested. It also has information for lawyers, so it serves that audience as well, and for family members. So at least on the law side, it helps them to learn how to better advise their non-citizen clients in case they're not familiar with all the steps in the process. Okay, so a few student projects. Some of these things may look familiar to some of you former students. This project is called Healthy Pick, and this was done for the Rosedale community in Kansas City, Kansas. A lot of the projects in my class are presented as prototypes because we don't have any funds at the Art Institute where I was teaching at the time to be able to implement these. And so we present them as proposals for the community, and then they are free to do with them what they're able to in terms of funding or not funding or whatever. So Healthy Pick is a set of activities designed to help 4th and 5th grade students understand the effects that their food choices have on their bodies. So the problem that the students found was that there's a little bit of a disconnect from like this intellectual knowledge, like, yeah, fruits and vegetables are good for you, and what that impact is on their body. Like, how does that affect you physically during your day? So they were trying to figure out a more active way to kind of integrate those two sides of the coin. So this game is called My Healthy Body. It's a game that helps students visualize the positive effects that certain foods have on your body, like spinach or carrots, and how, what the connection is between the nutrients in there and certain things in your body. Like for my 6-year-old daughter, we talk about how black beans, they have protein, and protein gives you big muscles, and so this game is kind of a pin the tail on the donkey type of game that helps the students make that connection through this kind of physical action of saying, okay, I got this question right now, I get to put the sunglasses on this little character. And they named the little guy Frank Rushton, which is the name of their elementary school. So. This game is called My Healthy Foods, and it's a fun little bingo-like game. Obviously played with the googly eyes, make it more fun. It's about alternative food choices. So things like choosing sorbet as an alternative to ice cream, for example, and alternative food preparation. So steaming versus like boiling or frying food. And so what are a little bit better ways that you can prepare food or better food choices than maybe the ones that you're engaged in right now. And again, using games and that interactive element and the discussion that kind of flows out of that interaction to help cement that knowledge. In My Healthy Meal, students were asked to design their own Happy Meal, highlighting all the healthy foods that they had learned about in all the previous activities. So this was kind of the capstone piece in this little curriculum that the students developed. So this project I thought was really interesting because it's a really low cost, it's a simple addition that easily fits into existing health curricula. These students were actually able to go into, they gained access because they had the motivation and intestinal fortitude to contact a teacher and say, hey, we want to talk with you about the possibility of doing this thing. We want to talk to students. And the teacher was cool with it, and so he let them come in and interact with students during class time. They got all the clearances that they needed. They prototyped these things, they tested them out with students, and they developed these little materials and they played these games with the students. And so this was a kind of a one-off thing with handmade mock-ups and things like that. But it did serve the purpose of educating these students in the way that they wanted them to. All right. So this is Mr. Babb's project. He's down here in the front row. This project addresses the lack of quality playground equipment with a do-it-yourself approach that requires imagination on the kids' part and also very little equipment. So again, we're in Rosedale. The parks there are not in very good shape. They do have some playground equipment, but the interesting thing about this project was that it tried to figure out ways to get kids active and use their imagination without throwing a bunch of money toward a traditional kind of solution, like, oh, we just need to buy more playground equipment, so let's raise money and buy another big, cheap, not cheap, but expensive actually, big plastic and metal contraption. So you can see here the way that this is structured. So this was an early prototype where you have equipment choices, you have action choices, and you have objectives. So you figure out from this little spinner, there's all these different possibilities of how you can combine these 3 different aspects and then kind of come up with your own game. So this is field testing the prototype with a student in Rosedale, trying to figure out how this thing might work, what's good and bad about it. And then the final presentation for the prototype would be, it kind of moved from this handheld thing to this like big thing that could be installed in a park as sort of a sculptural element. So kids could go up to it, spin each of those 3 discs, and then try to come up with their own game based on the small piece of equipment, the action, and the goal. So this project understood kids' need for exercise and their motivation for fun playtime, which kids are always motivated for that. The financial obstacles of contemporary playground equipment, and it also created this simple system that put kids in charge of creative game making. Okay, so this student developed a storytelling, reading, and diversity project that was born out of his own experiences as a multicultural youth. He grew up with a Saudi Arabian father and a Caucasian mom. So he's always been interested in issues of diversity, inclusion. So he developed these 3 stories. He wrote them, he illustrated them, and they're dealing with diversity and tolerance. And of course using Islamic-based patterning to kind of reference the specific type of cultural inclusion that he was interested in. So he designed and wrote these books, and then he was able to connect with 7 different schools in the Kansas City area: inner city public schools, suburban schools, Kansas City Muslim school, and even a Catholic school. So a really diverse range of schools. And he got some volunteers together from KCAI, and they went out and were able to read these books in a series of interactions with students over the course of a few weeks. So they had, again, a little kind of curriculum-based situation that they set up. So they read these books to the students and had discussion about them afterwards. And then what I think is actually arguably the most interesting part of the project was that students were then given blank books to tell their own stories about difference and tolerance. And then they exchanged those books that they made with books from kids at the other schools. So they were able to gift a book and then receive a book from a child that had quite a different experience, and then they could kind of share that and hopefully be united through that storytelling process. So I think this project does a really great job of articulating the author's values for diversity, valuing diversity, valuing inclusion, as well as those of the children, because they were able to input into this system as well through their involvement in storytelling. It asking them to participate. It reinforces their value as contributors into this project, and it actually actively engages them in considering the issues that Ramsey was presenting to them. All right, so how can you get involved? A few ideas here. If you're interested in this kind of thing, if it's piquing your interest. Some of these might seem obvious, but I thought, well, it's useful to just make them explicit. You could do pro bono work through your studio. I know a lot of studios do this already. They have particular pro bono projects that they do, particular clients they like to work for, certain causes. And that's been common through the years, of course. The issue with this is obviously that it relegates the pro bono stuff to the sidelines because you have real paying work that you have to do. So there's this okay, we have real clients and then we have pro bono clients. And we'll do this when we can, when time allows, and that kind of thing. Some studios, and I've seen this isn't just VML, but I'm just using them as a point of example because they were sort of top of mind. Some studios are now more visibly committed to their kind of volunteerism and their commitment to the community. So the VML Foundation, they donate time through volunteer hours, like action in the community. They donate talent through pro bono design work, and they donate funds. VML actually does a matching funds kind of program, so employees can agree to contribute X amount of dollars to a cause, and then VML will match that to a certain level. So I thought that was kind of an interesting example of sort of upping the ante of community involvement in these 3 areas. So paid work for studio. Oh wait, that's actually different. Pro bono. So paid work for your studio, through your studio. So why did I differentiate that from the pro bono stuff? And obviously this is something you can talk to your creative director or senior partner or something about the possibility of doing this. But the reason I say paid work through your studio, when you ask someone to pay for design services, and you guys probably all know this when you've done freelance work or whatever, if you do work for free, people kind of value it at that level in a sense. Like, they don't necessarily understand all the time and effort that comes with that work that you're doing. And it's easy for them because they don't have skin in the game, right? They don't have a financial commitment. And so it's easy for them to say, especially if they don't like what you did, see you later, or just kind of like drop off the map or whatever. So if you can't do paid work in this realm, it gets the nonprofit or community group or whatever, it gets them to have skin in the game, and it kind of cements a commitment on their part. So that's why I feel like doing paid work is important in this realm. And also it starts to legitimize this type of work and not kind of relegate it to the after hours kind of sphere, right? If we're going to be able to make a living or build this into a movement that's legitimate and where people can have gainful and sustainable careers, we have to figure out models to make the funding for this work, rather than just either doing it for free or hunting for grants all the time from philanthropic organizations that are going to try to throw money at this as much as they're able. And so one tip about this is just the notion that if you bring a well thought out proposal for how this could work to your boss or your creative director or whatever, rather than just going and saying, oh, I think we should do this, and sort of putting it on them, I think it'll be a lot better received if you say, hey, I think we should do this, and here's how we could do it. I have this kind of plan that maybe needs to be worked out more, but here's the steps I think we could go through to make this happen, and here's some ideas. So you're assuming responsibility for the initiative rather than just like throwing it back at them saying, oh, we should be doing this stuff. Of course, you can do your own after hours projects. The good thing about this is that you have total freedom. You can pick the types of causes you want to work for. You can make up your own cause. You can do whatever the heck you want on your own time. It's your thing. And this is, obviously it can be either volunteer work, it could be paid work, and of course, like I said earlier, paid work is better if you're able to manage that. Another option, if you're really committed to this stuff, is working in-house for a nonprofit. Don't quote me on the accuracy of this, but I did a quick search on greatnonprofits.org, and apparently there are over 7,800 nonprofits in the KC area. I was pretty blown away by that number. It wouldn't surprise me if that's accurate. So there's got to be somebody out there that can use the help of graphic designers, right? And through my own work, I've been doing some bicycle advocacy work recently, and I've gotten to know a lot of the people at Bike Walk KC. Have you guys heard of that organization? They have a full-time designer on staff, Rachel Krause. I've gotten to know her quite well. And she has a design and journalism background, and she's on staff there full-time doing all the visual stuff for Bike Walk KC. So that's just one small example of people working in-house at a nonprofit. Or you can start your own damn studio. And people are doing that. So there's groups of all different stripes out there working in a lot of different disciplines, from branding firms to design-oriented nonprofits to like the Center for Urban Pedagogy. I believe they're in New York City, but they're very much a design and creative-oriented nonprofit organization. Like, they really understand the value that we bring to social issues. There's mural collectives, there's individual poster artists, and everything in between that you can imagine. So Thrive was started there in Helena, Arkansas, a little delta town right on the Mississippi in eastern Arkansas. That was started by a couple of students of mine after they went to grad school. They decided to work in this little town that's suffering the same plight as small towns across the U.S., job plight, and economic issues and all the stuff that comes with that. So they've been there for 5 years now, doing all kinds of economic development projects and design projects in that community. Project H, which was started by Emily Peloton, She's an industrial designer. She focuses on educating youth about how they can engage their community through building projects, architecture and industrial design types of projects. Hyperact is kind of a more traditional looking design studio. They're in New York City, but they do a lot of social change work, so a lot of cause-based projects. Free Range Studio, they focus on a lot of motion graphic stuff, but they function largely as they look and feel like a traditional design studio, but again, it's a lot of cause-based things. They work for a lot of larger nonprofits. Fabiana Rodriguez is an example of an individual. She's actually has a printmaking background, but she does a ton of poster work. And she is all over the US. She's interested in immigration issues and Latino rights issues. So she does a lot of poster work, a lot of protest graphics and things like that. And she just, from sheer determination, she's been able to piece together a really interesting career doing this stuff. Groundswell is a mural collective, and on and on. I have probably over 100 links of different types of studios that are in all different kind of corners of the map of this sphere of design. So, let's talk. You guys have questions or comments? So we know what this thing is. We know that it has a history of some sort, that it's enjoyed renewed resurgence, and people are figuring this stuff out in more detail. We know that it's a little bit different than traditional graphic design. We've seen some projects that illustrate how these things are different. I'm curious if you guys have any comments or questions, or if you just want to go get more coffee or whatever. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have. Yeah, in the back.
Where do you feel you see some of the greatest needs in Kansas City?
Oh, gee, I'm no expert in that by any means. I'm trying to be an expert in the topic. I'm not an expert in the nonprofit world. That's a good question. There are nonprofits that get a lot of visibility because they're big, like, Harvesters is really big, and things like that. So I think that's anybody's guess as to what the biggest needs are, really. I mean, one thing that hopefully I'm clear in telling my students is that the more you're personally connected to the cause or to the type of work that you're doing, the better job you're going to do at that, and the more passionate you're going to be about it, and that's going to result in better work. So if you're interested, if your passion lies in figuring out what the greatest need and working toward the greatest need, and you're not necessarily all about cancer research or curing cancer or whatever, if it's about what's the biggest problem, then by all means research that and figure that out and channel your energies toward that. But if your heart is in helping people find food to eat on a regular basis, or food deserts, or nutrition. A lot of the stuff that we did in Rosedale centers around nutrition, because that was a big problem that they had identified through the research that the community group had done, the Rosedale Development Association. So the students that were working with Rosedale, they were dealing with all kind of issues around nutrition and fitness and things like that, like general health and well-being of the children in the neighborhood. So I'd say it's up to you, what's in your heart about what you want to connect with and where you want to make a difference. Yeah.
How would you recommend documenting a project that doesn't necessarily have any tactics? Concept-based things, like you're designing a strategy versus a logo?
That's a good question. I think that, it's going to have to be largely typographic, but the more visual you can make that, I think the better. So I'm thinking about those malaria posters. They're kind of diagrammatic, So you can map out strategies. You know, you might be able to supplement that with, supplement that type of documentation with kind of process photography. A lot of process documentation I see in these projects are about like post-it notes on the walls and people around a table and stuff like that. And it gets a little bit repetitive because a lot of these processes are so participatory and so dialogic, but that's the way it is and that's what it looks like. So that's hard because the thing isn't inherently visual. But I think if you can be diagrammatic about it, if you can, you know, try to simplify and visualize the process in some way, I don't know if that helps much. I mean, that's off the top of my head kind of answer. Yeah.
Have any of your student projects gone on to be adopted by the communities they work for, or?
We have had a few. So the book project that I showed from Ramsey about inclusion and diversity and things, that one grant, there's a really great organization that we've been a part of from the get-go called Design Ignites Change. And I think actually you were the one that gave me the link to that group like a long time ago. I can't remember what year it was, but so they're based out of New York City, and they're a nonprofit that their goal is to raise awareness and educate and foster this type of design work. And so to that end, they've been offering student grants. So in my class, I make the students make the application, document their project, put the project on the website, and submit to get money. And so Ramsey's got some money. He got like $4,000 something to print a bunch of blank books and things like that. So his, you know, I think he probably could have done this project without the grant money, but that helped to get a bunch of these blank books for the kids to work with. So his was actually implemented. The first one that I showed, the Healthy Pig, now that wasn't like funded or produced in some professional way, but the kids had the interaction. So I'd say, yeah, that was, you know, they implemented it just by like prototyping it and interacting with the kids. There's been several others that have been adopted. Actually, Tom Morse-Brown down here in the front row, he did a project with Rosedale and a couple of other students in his class called I Need a Sidewalk. They got, how much money did you guys get? Was
47.
it 47? Maybe I was mixing up Ramsey's number with yours, but yeah, so they got $4,700 to advocate for more sidewalks in Rosedale that would give kids access across a busy road to Rosedale Park. Have you guys been up and down Mission Road? You know, like you go up that huge hill and Rosedale Park is on the other side. Most of the neighborhood is separated from that park. There are no sidewalks on either side of that road. So Tom and two of his classmates, Tammy Shell and Amanda LaFoon, who works at BML, they were advocating and raising awareness and kind of putting some gentle pressure on the government to say, there's no sidewalks here, this is dangerous, we need to get these kids over to the park in a safe way. Well, so they got money to kind of produce some materials, and they had a billboard on I-35 and got a website produced and things like that to kind of, and that was a very dialogic site. People could comment and like get a little tile on this website and like express their desire and need and thoughts and stuff like that. And so the Rosedale Development Association, they continued to kind of push after that campaign sort of died back down. And then we found out just a few weeks ago that they were actually able to make this thing happen. And so we went to a little event where they had plans drawn up. We saw how they're restriping the road. They're doing what's called a road diet. So instead of like cutting into people's yards to make the sidewalk, which is really expensive because you have to move utility poles and stuff, they're actually doing a road diet. So they're narrowing the road a bit and putting the sidewalk out there. So the curbs are going to be more in the road. So less priority of, so they're kind of shifting priorities away from car-centric to like a more complete streets kind of attitude. So the sidewalks and pedestrian traffic is going to get kind of bumped up on the priority list there. So within a year, that project should be completed, and there will be a crosswalk and new curbs and striping and everything on the road. So yeah, that was pretty exciting. And there's been several others that have gotten funding through Design Ignites Change. That's been the primary means that my students have been able, when they have been able to get projects done. Erica Gehring right here in the middle, she and her partner Michael Jumper, how much money did you guys get?
$500.
$500 for having a good concept. So they
Idea
also, yeah, it was an idea award. Their project was how to redesign the middle school cafeteria to make it a more appealing place and encourage healthier food choices. What was interesting about their project was that they, very simple kind of strategy, they found some research from Stanford University that said, here are very simple things you can do to, when kids go through the lunch line, and they were just like, okay, let's implement that in our proposal. Let's put the healthier choices in front, you know, put the less healthy choices kind of back here away from the students. Let's put healthier choices toward the front of the line in the sequence. And then they supplemented it with some other ideas of their own, like, you know, resurfacing some of the stainless steel, you know, there's tons of stainless steel in the cafeteria, make it more appealing, a more fun place to be, painting the walls, adding large scale interior graphics and things like that, just to make it a little more interesting and an invigorating place to eat lunch rather than in a big cement box, right? Cement steel box. So, yeah, I've been proud of the things that they've been able to accomplish. Yep.
How do you convince these organizations that design is the answer versus like putting their money towards the resources that they like, towards buying food for people, or like spending their money and their time and their efforts on creating this design kind of movement, or you know, posters or books or
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of that is born out of relationships, and I don't think it's much different than the client, like normal clients that you guys are working with on a regular basis. Like your normal clients have somehow come to understand the value of design, and you know that it increases their bottom line or whatever. And so I think it's going to be born out of relationships that you have, or relationships that you're willing to cultivate and educate the client. You know, there's got to be some level of willingness on their part from the get-go. So if there's a scenario like, okay, I'm just coming at these people, I've never met them before, I'm going to introduce myself and say, hey, I can do these things for you. You know, the onus is obviously going to be on you to do some education and say, hey, I'm Tyler, I really like what you guys are doing, I'd like to be able to help you, here's what I think I can do, and here's how I think. It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier when you're trying to convince your boss, like, we need to go after this type of work, like let's do some paid work for nonprofits, and here's how we can do it. You got to put your pitch together and make a case for how that can work. And I've had people that I've worked with, I've been doing a lot of work for about 1.5 years now with the fast food workers. Have any of you guys seen all the fast food stuff that's been going on around the country? They're fighting for 15 in the union. I've been working with the organizers of that group in Kansas City, and they knew what I could bring to the table, and they actually came to me because I had worked with those guys before on some things. So they knew that I could do some things to help them out. But every project that we do, that level of belief and trust increases, and that's the long-term engagement piece. So I think that it's just that learning process, just like with any client, you know, but ultimately at the outset, it's going to be on you to like make a case for what you can do. And if you don't have stuff that's in this realm, you can maybe show analogous kind of work. Like, okay, I haven't done work for you guys, but here's some stuff that's similar, and I'll help you understand how this kind of stuff could apply to you, and we can move forward and do some really interesting things. That said, it's not, I want to be real careful that it's not about designing stuff for them. All that stuff is just a vehicle. You know, this is just a means for people to have relationships. And actually, I believe that the best graphic design is simply a mediator. It gives us an excuse to be in some kind of relationship. And so if it allows that group, that community group or whatever, to connect with the average citizen and have a relationship, have an exchange or a dialogue, that's what it should be doing, right? So I would frame it in those terms as well, rather than saying, hey, I need to make you some cool business cards, because it's not necessarily about the thing. You need to be looking at that larger system and saying, we can make these things, or we can do this website or devise this process, and the end result is going to be that you know, you're gonna get people on board, or you're gonna be able to serve the people better that you wanna serve. So I think if you can frame it in those bigger picture ways, that'll be helpful as well, because then it's not just about design, it's not about like making the stuff, it's about that human interaction, and it's about getting them to their larger goal of helping the people that they want to help. Yeah.
In your own observations and experiences, have you seen any organizations that prioritize mobile design, mobile web, or native mobile experiences to kind of drive their organization?
That's interesting. There are projects like that, and I thought about this because it seems like the majority of the stuff that I've been doing and the stuff that I see, it ends up in some physical form, right? I'm trying to think of stuff. Any former students that can you guys think of any projects you've seen that are like mobile based? There's got to be stuff out there, but nothing's like coming to mind. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I wonder if part of it has to do with the idea of like the needs rather than wants, and more people equate, you know, like the mobile and the digital stuff with people satisfying people's wants. But that said, you know, there's maps. There's like alternative maps that people can use to, you know, access different types of resources. Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say Laura's Anchor project.
That's
That
true.
was a good example, I think.
Yeah, that's actually really good. So Laura Berglund, class of 2010, one of her student projects was called Anchor, and it was a proposal, like a mobile-based proposal to help students be more safe around the KCAI campus. And I'm trying to remember the specifics about how it functioned. Can you help me, Hillary?
I think it was just basically like an alert system, like if people saw something weird or wanted to bring some attention to a certain area, it like alerted people on campus
Right.
versus like the email system that we would randomly get.
So it was
from
much
security.
more immediate form of communication
Yeah.
dealing with safety issues. And I think there was a map-based element where, you know, you could see where things had happened, just like where a report had just been filed, or you might be able to look at history of things like that. So, I mean, that's a great example. Thanks for the reminder on that. You know, using that for a fundamental need, you know, like the need to be safe in your neighborhood. So there's probably a lot of other great uses for that technology, definitely. Yep.
I just wanted to say, if you want to find out more about nonprofits, and there is, if you go to Nonprofit Connect online, there's a
Right.
little job list for one, and you can kind of find out what the issues are with nonprofits and what they're looking for, and just learn more about them in general and how they function.
Right, Nonprofit Connect.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. We need to kind of wrap stuff up, right?
Yeah, we're gonna wrap up, but if you have more questions for Tyler, feel free to chat with him after we're done closing in just a few minutes, as you help yourself to coffee and food. So thank you, Tyler, so much.
Yeah.